Sauda Johnson McNeil, and I'm the founder of the Law Offices of Sauda Johnson. We had a wonderful live webinar, and I received a lot of great feedback. And some of the things that people said is, we just want a little bit more information. So what I decided to do was update this webinar. So you will notice that some of the scenes are from the live webinar, and some are from the updates that I'm making now.
I've been practicing an attorney for 16 years. I started off in New York as having the law offices of Johnson & Sylvia with my former business partner. And when I moved to California, I then started my practice out here. And I have now been specializing in special education law for the last 7 years, since around 2012.
I also want to acknowledge my social media director, Brittany Murray. I also want to acknowledge my parents, Suzette Johnson and Ronald Ashford, and of course my loving husband, Chris McNeil, for his unending support. I'm very excited to share my knowledge of special education law with you. This is a perfect webinar for you if you believe your child or loved one may need special education services, they already have special education services but you don't have their cumulative records, or an organized system for the records you already have. And finally, this is a great webinar for you if you're interested in becoming a professional advocate for other people's children. For the purposes of this webinar, we're going to talk about initiating the special education process. Special education in a nutshell. There's IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which is the primary act for special education law. There are other statutes that are anti-discrimination, and they are considered civil rights laws, such as Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, Every Student Succeeds Act, Family Education Rights Privacy Act, and the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So what I want to do is give you a little history about the special education world, because I feel like you would have a little bit of understanding of how to advocate if you understand the history of special education. There was a landmark decision, Brown v. Board of Education.
And prior to this decision in 1954, it was the norm to exclude or separate children with disabilities in educational settings. In Brown, the court determined that segregating children in public schools based on race, even if the facility or other factors are the same,
deprived children of the minority group of equal educational opportunities. After this decision, parents of children with disabilities used the same line of arguments and began to sue school districts to challenge the idea of separate but equal in educational settings. Parents of children with disabilities strongly believed that excluding their child was discrimination solely because he or she had a disability. After several lawsuits, including the famous Park and Miller cases, Congress started investigating treatment of children with disabilities and determined they were not receiving an appropriate education.
First, we have the Special Education Law, which is the Individuals with Disability Education Act. Now, when you see this law, this is the main law of special education. And for tonight's purposes, we'll call it IDEA. In order to qualify for special education services, you have to qualify under IDEA. And let me just be really clear, it's not just about qualifying for special education law by having a disability. It's also saying that you need the service. So what I mean by that is, as you see, there's intellectual disabilities, hearing impairment, which includes deafness, speech or language impairment, visual impairment, including blindness, serious emotional disturbance, which is referred to as ED, emotional disturbance, orthopedic impairments, autism, traumatic brain injury, other health impairments, or specific learning disabilities.
And who, by reason thereof, needs special education and related services.
So what I'm trying to say is, if you have a child, let's say, for example, they are dyslexic, which will fall under a specific learning disability. However, they are accessing the curriculum. They're not only, we're not just looking at grades, because grades is not really the only factor on whether or not someone is accessing the curriculum. We look at social, we look at emotional, we're looking at behavior. There's several different factors that we're looking at when we decide if someone does qualify for special education. So just having dyslexia alone will not qualify you necessarily. We would also need to know whether or not you need the service, because there, like I said, there are people who may have dyslexia but are fine and they're able to read and they're able to access the curriculum. You're going to see.
Before we continue, I want to explain some terms in case you're not familiar with legal language. A statute is a law passed by federal, state, and local legislative bodies, and they are distinguished from case law, which are decided by courts. So, IDEA, you will see, falls under 20 U.S.C. section 1400. And then there are also regulations, which are analysis and comments and changes, and they're known as commentary. They will include questions and answers about IDEA 2004 from the U.S. Department of Education, and they're documented in the Federal Register, 34 CFR Part 300.
I know we're just getting started, but just talking about IDEA, special education, the history, it's pretty complicated. So I just want to make sure that we have an understanding before I continue to move on. Oh, David from Atlanta joined. Hey, David. Hey. Welcome. The question from David says, what if you move from one state to another? Does that law apply everywhere? Oh, okay, great question. So basically what has been asked is, if you live in one state and then you say we live in the state of California and you move to the state of New York, does this special education, does IDEA still hold any weight, and does that law apply? And that's a great question, because the answer is yes. IDEA is a federal law, which means that every state in the United States has to follow this particular law.
IDEA is not the only law governing special education. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 also provides protections for students with disabilities.
So in a nutshell, 504, it prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities by recipients of federal funds. Therefore, a private school must follow the 504 law if they receive federal funding. The reason why I wanted to point out private school is because you will know that if your child is in public school and then you pull your child out to attend private school and you have what's called an individualized education program, which is an IEP, and you're using that IEP at a public school, then that IEP is not necessarily applicable at a private school, because IDEA is specifically for public schools. The main differences between IDEA and 504 is IDEA is basically saying, school, you have to have liability, accountability, whereas 504 doesn't have that same accountability. So let's take, for example, someone who may be in a wheelchair. If a child is in a wheelchair under 504, really we're talking about access, being able to access the building, being able to, for a ramp, you can actually go up the ramp. You maybe where they may be seated. So that is part of the 504, as well as the American with Disabilities Act. Those are kind of extensions of each other. Now, the difference is under IDEA, it's like, okay, we want access, but are we benefiting? Okay, so you let us get in this building with the wheelchair, but is the student actually learning anything from being in front of the classroom? Well, with IDEA, if you're in front of that classroom, we need to know, is that working? Is placing that child in front of the classroom, and are they actually benefiting from the education? So there's more of accountability. Title II of the ADA prohibits disability by all public entities. So again, that's going to include school districts and also may impact private schools. But I just wanted you to be familiar with some of the other civil rights laws out there, because as you start to learn special education, you'll see IDEA all the time. You'll start seeing 504, you'll see Americans with Disabilities Act, but there may be some other laws that you see. One of those is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was signed into law by President Lyndon Baines Johnson. And he believed that full educational opportunity should be our first national goal. And then we have ESSA from 2015. This was signed into law by President Barack Obama, and it basically reauthorized the Lyndon Johnson law.
Next, you have FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. This is a federal law that protects the privacy of students' educational records. Next, you have FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. This is a federal law that protects the privacy of students' educational records. The law applies to all schools that receive funds under applicable programs of the U.S. Department of Education.
And then the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act requires all school districts to ensure that each child of a homeless parent and each homeless child shall have equal access to the same free, appropriate public education as provided to children and youth who are not homeless. So when we think about advocate, this is a person who is basically pleading for someone else, right? So as an attorney, I advocate on behalf of my clients all the time. I advocate on behalf of my parent clients as well as my student clients. And again, it's me really out there representing, not just representing on a normal basis, but for me, I go deep when I'm advocating, right? So when you think about advocacy, you're thinking about who would be the best person to advocate for your child, for your loved one who has a unique need. You're sitting with them every day, right? Watching them do their homework, watching how they eat, looking at their social skills. So you're going to be the best person to know exactly what is going on with your child, whether or not they're reaching their milestones. So for me, I would say you always want to try to advocate first before you bring in an attorney. As when you're advocating, sometimes you really need to be able to go in there and be very diplomatic and almost think of yourself as a project manager. Okay, you are going in, identifying the needs, setting goals, setting timelines, and then you're making sure there's implementation. Oh, we have a question. Okay, it says, do you have to be a parent or guardian to be an advocate for kids? Good question. And who was that from? Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. Okay, so you do not have to be a parent or a guardian to advocate for a child. So technically, even though I'm an attorney, I advocate for other people's children. I actually didn't even tell you how I got started. I had a very, very close family member who called me, and she was having concerns with her daughter. They were saying that she was dumb and just everything you could think of. And at the time, I was a real estate attorney, and I had to figure out how to advocate for this family member. After, of course, speaking to several other attorneys, doing my own research, I was able to figure out how to help her and found out that there were some concerns with her visual processing. So to answer the question, you do not have to be a parent or a guardian to advocate for someone else's child. There are several people out there who are professional advocates. It's what they do for a living. There are many people who start off just advocating for their children and then decide that, you know what, this feels great, so I want to advocate for other people's children. It is okay to ask questions. Maintain all records, stay organized. Make your child's teacher your friend, not your foe. I understand that it can be a very emotional process for you, but we want to give the teachers the benefit of the doubt. So please make them your friend and try to work through the issues. Build a support system. You can't do this alone. There are other parents, there are support groups, there are Facebook groups that are out there, other parents, other guardians, they're going through the same things. There are other attorneys, advocates who are out there. We're all talking about the same dialogue when it comes to special education world. So please build yourself a support system. And then always remember to identify the problems, but also propose solutions. I'm noticing that my child has behavioral issues whenever math is the subject. This is what the teacher is telling me. This is what I'm noticing at home. So maybe we need to figure out if the behavior is triggered by math because the child maybe doesn't understand math, and that's frustrating, right? So those are the type of things we want to think about when we talk about proposing solutions. So far, we've covered special education law, the history of special education, the difference between IDEA, 504, Americans with Disability Act. We've talked about advocacy.
Next, we want to talk about developing your roadmap. A roadmap also serves as a communication tool to help articulate what you're thinking and explain the why for the goal of your child and how you want to achieve the goal. So you're going to have this timeline and you're going to be specific about what you notice the special needs of your child are, or the person you're advocating for. Like what their special needs are. Like, for example, reading concerns or math concerns. You're going to state what you think he or she needs to improve. And then you want to talk about what you want ideally for your child. For example, maybe you want them to sit in a certain place in the classroom, or you want them to interact with more students in the general education population, or class size, or teachers, staff, or teaching methods or materials. These are some of the things that you should write down on your roadmap.
I want you to be specific about what you notice the special need is. Like, for example, if it's reading concerns, I want you to jot that down on your roadmap. State what you think he or she needs to improve. That's part of the need. And then you want to identify the ideal program, classroom, setting, interaction with the general ed population, class size, age, special needs of other children, teacher, staff, things of that nature. And then you want to also write down your goals. You know, you want to know, are they measurable? Is it, if we say that you want your child to be able to read a paragraph 2 out of 3 times without getting any help from anyone, right? Just, you want to know what you consider measurable so that you see whether or not they have improved. And then you want to know what timeline. So if we're talking August when school starts, do you want this to, do you want to see the improvement by June, right? So that's
Next, we want to talk about student educational records. Under FERPA, you will see documents such as attendance records, IEP records, assessment records, discipline records, service logs, standardized testing results, medical information, notes, essentially anything that has been maintained by the school district that is regarding your child would be in this file. Okay, so you always want to request records in writing. You're going to request to inspect and review records, and you're going to state in the letter when the due date is for them to return the documents to you. Under FERPA, the school must provide the parent with an opportunity to inspect and review within 45 days following receipt of the request. In California, where I am, it's 5 business days. I would suggest, if you're in a different state, to look up what the local's laws are as far as returning the records to you.
A lot faster. You're going to have to pick your battles. And so one of the things that is definitely worth fighting for are copies of these records. One thing is you're going to have sometimes pushback because the school district is going to try to charge you. For example, I had a call about 2 weeks ago and I requested records on behalf of a client, and district called me and said, oh, well, they'll need to pay. So of course I was very quick to let them know that this would be a financial hardship on the parent, and I asked them to please go ahead and send the records, which they will be doing. Okay, so we have advocacy essentials: a binder, folder, 3-ring hole punch, sticky labels. Essentially, I want you to have all these things.
Just to have for your arsenal. Okay, so when you have these documents, you want to separate them into the years. And then after that, you want to separate the years into grades. And then with this 3-hole punch, you're going to punch the documents and place them into your binder.
We have a question. Do you recommend another way to organize all the information other than in a binder? It's so cumbersome. Okay, that's a great question. So there are 2 ways that you can organize, right? There is the binder, which I'm tend to be a little old school, and the way you organize it, you're going to put everything, you're going to first take all the documents, and you're going to separate them by year. So for example, if you have a third grader, you would start off with, say, 2017, 2018, 2019, right? You separate it by year. Then after that, you separate it by grade. So you would have first grade, and you would put the most recent date. So we're in 2020, a January 20 document will go on top, and then August 2019 would be on the bottom, right? And then you would just keep it organized in that reverse order, and you put it in your binder. However, there's the other option of scanning all of your documents and putting it into a PDF, and then you can create the same organizational system. You can create that on the computer. So we've already requested records, and we've reviewed the records, we've organized them, and now we are going to request assessments, okay? So the first thing you want to do is you want to submit a written request for assessments to determine eligibility for special education services, and you also want to understand the developmental level, okay? So you want to request an assessment in writing. You want to familiarize yourself with the timelines to receive the report, and you want to know when the IEP meeting is supposed to occur.
When you request an assessment, then the school district should get back to you within 60 days with an IEP date, which means that they should assess your child, they should have a report, and they should schedule an IEP within 60 days. The school will give you an assessment plan. You're going to review that to ensure that they are assessing your child for the suspected areas of disability, and then you're going to sign that. You're going to give it back to the school district, and then after that, they will start the assessments, and you should get the results, like I said, within the 60 days. You always want to follow up as well. If you haven't received the information that you've asked for within your respective timelines, then you want to send your follow-up letters. Remember, put everything in writing. So you always want to follow up as far as with your records request, as well as with your assessment request, and or if you haven't received an assessment plan, you want to follow up with that. Remember, put it in writing so that you are building some evidence for yourself in the event that they don't actually give you what you've asked for.
I have a question. So someone wants to know whether or not there's any other resources or there's any other classes, and that's actually a great question, because actually I am going to be in a few minutes discussing an actual course that I will be teaching, which will be completely everything I'm talking about, but way more in depth, and it'll be a self-paced, almost like if you imagine you're going on, you can just go on the computer and you can just push play, and for 15 minutes you get all the laws, you'll have everything in depth. So I will actually be teaching an IEPBOSS course. I want to just talk to you about our strategies when you're dealing with conflict, right? Just remember that, as I already mentioned, as the advocate, you are the project manager, and you are also the parent. So you want to keep that in mind, because that sometimes is a tricky balance when you're trying to advocate for your child. But you want to work on building relationships. Always take care of yourself. Self-care is important. You want to remain knowledgeable, which is staying on top of the special ed laws. I have a newsletter. You can always read that. That'll help you stay on top of everything. And you also want to make sure that you're approachable. I am super sweet when I go into these IEP meetings, until I can't be sweet anymore, because, sometimes they come for you. But I try to stay as sweet as possible, because I want to be approachable. I want to be approachable to parents, to students, as well as to the teachers. So remember, we're talking about negotiating by trying to see their perspective, understand their fears, and then you want to hear their bottom line. When I say they, I'm talking about the school district. You want to listen, and you want to seek to understand them before trying to be understood, before your point is understood, okay? Tonight, I want to thank you for coming. We talked about special education law, the basics. We talked about Advocacy 101. We talked about requesting student records, organizing student records. We talked about assessments. We're making assessment requests. And we also talked about resolving differences, which at the end of the day means putting the child first. Got questions about IEP? You're not alone. Become an IEP boss. Well, someone is an IEP boss student or a perfect candidate for an IEP boss if they're driven to confidently lead people to a real understanding of the beauty and talent within their child. You're committed to helping your child obtain services that help him or her make meaningful academic progress, and you want to understand special education laws and its intersection with other laws. You're also willing to learn to negotiate with an emphasis on your child's needs despite the district's attitude. So what you're going to get is, again, it will be myself teaching you all the different laws, the different negotiations that you would need, helping you to work on your confidence skills. It is going to be a course. It's a very extensive course. It's about 25 topics, and it will be a self-paced module. So you'll just go on, you'll have each module might be about 10 or 15 minutes. It will explain the laws. It will actually give you some laws. It will give you actual documentation. Some of the sample letters I'm giving to you, but even more in depth, and you can take it at your leisure. There's also going to be a private Facebook community. You'll have access to myself as well as my social media director, Brittany Murray. We will also be there to answer any questions, as well as everyone who takes the course. You are going to be a community in the support system that we're creating for you, so you can always talk to each other online and offline. And then, of course, we're going to have a weekly question answer. So something similar to what I'm doing now, but it will be once a week. It will be a live question and answer session because, of course, the course will be pre-recorded, but I want to make sure you have access to me. So I not only will offer office hours over my computer, but I will also offer office hours if you want to call me over the phone. And maybe someone in LA wants to actually meet me. We'll figure that out as well. So again, here are your course topics. Again, it's a lot of information. That's why we're doing it as a pre-recorded self-paced module system. Introduction to special education, relevant laws and cases, breaking down even more in depth the IDEA, 504, McKinney Vento Homeless Act, the parent as a project manager, obstacles, roadmaps, student records, analyzing assessments. Those assessments are written by psychologists, and they're very complicated. I will have some guest lectures on to go over analyzing assessments. We're going to have special education eligibility, breaking down the IEP, because you're going to be an IEP boss, so you need to understand that. Goals, related services, accommodations, assistive technology. We're also going to talk about placement, where the child will be placed, stay put. What does that mean? Transitioning from middle school to high school, from high school to college, behavior issues, when your child's being bullied, mental health services, conflict resolution. What happens when you get to the point where you want to send your child to a charter school? Or what if they're in the hospital? Or what if there's illnesses? What if you want to homeschool? What if they're in a juvenile hall because they've been in some type of trouble with the law? What if they're in foster care? Those are all the different things that you will be learning in the IEP course. So please, it's gonna be a really exciting time. We're gonna have some great guests for you. And I really just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. My name is Sauda Johnson, better known as Attorney Sa, and I am signing out. Have a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.